All right, everyone, welcome to our week 3, part A live classroom. In this live classroom, we will be covering chapter 5, and then in a little bit here, once we finish this, we'll stop this recording, start a new one, and do our exam 1 prep. Okay. Before we jump into this, were there any questions from any assignments from last week or anything in the class that you're seeing?
I have a question about the whole document.getElementID. I don't know that there was ever much of a explanation of the syntax,
Okay.
the purposes behind all that. So sometimes I feel like I've been shown how to fish, but not taught to. I mean, given a fish, but not taught to fish.
All right. So this is a really important concept, so let's take a couple minutes and first let's Google it, and then let's look at an example and debug it and really dive into this thing. So anytime you're not sure how to type document.getElementById, I would just say you could Google document getElementById or JavaScript getElementById. Any one of those things that you Google, it'll pull up the exact same thing. So I'll just type in JavaScript getElementById. W3 Schools, our favorite place. All right, so notice you have document.getElementById. You can trust this, you can copy from here, throw it into your program. It's not plagiarizing or anything, it's just proper syntax. That's totally fine. So here's the proper syntax, okay? And it says, this function, getElementById, returns the element that has the ID attribute with the specified value, okay? It returns null if no element exists. Okay, so we've all seen this work. We've done assignments with it, and so you know that. And in this case, when we call the function my function, it'll reference this ID with demo up in here, and then it will replace that current value with hello world. Okay, that's what inner HTML does. It injects something from JavaScript into your page wherever you specified the ID. So if I try it, it'll just say hello world. Okay, now let's debug a program doing this. So here I have my template program. Not much going on here. I'm going to copy this file path. There we go, copy path, and paste it in my browser. Okay, F12 to open up my developer tools. I'm in the sources tab, and I could click on the file right here, my template.html file. I'm going to blow this up because I don't really have much going on in the body of my page. Okay, so let's think back to week 3 where we dealt with HTML. Sorry, you guys. Well, because that had to have been a half of week 2. Okay, so the first half of week 2, we were dealing with HTML, right? That was our HTML chapter, and we learned about body. Okay, and everything in the body of an HTML document, you will actually see rendered in the page. Okay, everything else you don't see rendered in the page. Everything else you'll see if you open up the developer tools, but that's it. Okay, but the body is what you'll actually see on the page. Document.getElementById will search the body of the page for a specific ID. Okay, so if you were looking for an ID and you can't find it anywhere in this body, then you'll get an error saying, hey, it returned null, just like we saw in the W3 Schools website just now. It's like, hey, if you couldn't find it or for whatever reason it's not there, it'll just return null. Now, I want to put a breakpoint right here on line 23. Now, if you haven't seen, so here's our video spreadsheet. Let's go to the videos tab. Okay, so right here, pull this up a little bit. The Chrome Developer Tools 3 sources, okay, that is how you debug. I have another debugging video right here. These are extremely handy tools to learn how to use. And you can use them on tests too. I totally allow that, okay? If you guys can learn how to use these tools and use it to get half your answers in tests, I fully support that, okay? Anyways, so I put a breakpoint in, and what this breakpoint will do is it will allow me to stop, or pause rather, the execution of the program, okay? So I put it on the first line inside of this function, template function. So as soon as I hit this button, which will call template function, my code is going to stop on line 23, okay? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit this button, It stopped on line 23. Now here, I can do a bunch of stuff, okay? I can see what different variables are in their current state. I can highlight over stuff to see what will be computed if I'm like doing a bunch of math and I want to see, okay, what will this chunk get? What will that chunk get? I can hover over document itself, okay? This built-in JavaScript object, and I can see the document has a lot of stuff in it, okay? All of this is accessible to us. Now, I have very rarely done stuff with many of these things. I've probably only ever touched like 20% of these, if that, okay? But there are a number of these that are extremely helpful, and depending on what type of website you're building or what type of program you're building, you might use some of these other unique ones that I haven't touched, okay? But there's a bunch of different attributes, and among these, there's one called value. You can see this value that we use right here. There's, well, sorry, value is not in there, but there's a function called getElementById, which is inside of document. And then there's a bunch of other stuff in here that is accessible to us as well. Okay, so if I hover over getElementById, you can see there's this like squiggly F right here. That just means that it's a function that we can use. Okay, so that's why you have to use document.getElementById, because getElementById is part of the document object. Okay, kind of like math, the math object in JavaScript. If I was going to come over to the console here and type in math.pi, you see we get a nice little pi number there. If I just type in pi, it'd be like, pi is not defined. I have no idea what that is. Okay, it's because pi is part of the math object. Okay, same with square root, same with random. All those things are part of the math object. Similarly, document is a very large object built into JavaScript that helps us access different things in our HTML document. Okay, so getElementById, this function, will isolate an entire element in the body of our document if it finds that ID. So I just highlighted from document to the end of this parenthesis, and you can see it found, we have an input. Anytime you see the pound sign right here, that is for ID. Okay, so you can see I have an input with an ID of temp1. Okay, it found this input down here that I have. Okay, it searched my body, searched the body of my document, and it found this ID. Okay, and then in here, inside of this ID, there's a bunch of stuff again. Again, most of which you will never use, but depending on what kind of program you're building, you're going to use some of it. Okay, for our cases in this class, there's this value right here, which we will use a lot. This value currently is an empty string because I didn't type anything into the input box. Okay, but that is how you would retrieve input from a user, by using this document.getElementById, and then in this ID that it finds, grab the value. Okay, the other big one that we're going to use a lot, if I scroll up here, is inner HTML. Okay, inner HTML is how you will put something back into the page. I have a question here in the chat. Let's see. Beware that it's also case sensitive. Yes. So our conversation about how HTML isn't case sensitive and JavaScript is, this lands in the JavaScript realm. It is extremely case sensitive. Okay. If I named this, for example, let me come out of this. If I named this temp1 with a capital T, and I refresh this page, you can see it updated there, and I hit my button. If I highlight from document to the end of this temp1 parenthesis, you can see it's null. All that stuff that was there a second ago, it's null. It's not there. Okay, so just like W3 School said, if it doesn't find the ID, it'll come back null. Okay, and that's an error that a lot of people get. All right, anytime you see, let me just show you the error. It will say, cannot read property value of null. Okay, the property that we're trying to reference here is value, and it's saying, hey, this is value of null, which means whatever is to the left of that dot came up null. All right, whether you misspelled document or had to type one getElementById or couldn't find the ID, it'd be null. So I was talking with a student yesterday, and I suggested that when they have a template function or when they have a template program, and notice as my template program, I have a function that will actually read input from the user and output something back by placing a message into the inner HTML of the document. Okay, if you did something like this, you could split it out into comments and say, hey, this is my input, This will be where I put my processing, and then this is where my output will be, okay? Anytime you have dot value, that is to retrieve an input from the user, usually from, or just about always from, a text box, or sorry, a text area or an input, okay? And then you have your processing, whatever you need to do. If you need to do math, concatenate strings, that's your processing. And then your output is when you put something into the inner HTML of your document. I have another comment here in the chat. Let's see here. Can you do an if error thing in JavaScript so that if the user puts text in an input instead of integers, it will tell them to put an integer instead of breaking the code? Yes. Yes, you can. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. We talked about the different types of ways to like select different things. You could use an if statement. You could use a try-catch block. There are functions built into JavaScript. There's like an is_nan function, which is short for is not a number. And it looks like this, and I could run that on a number to see if it could be parsed into a number so that I could do math with it. But yes, there's a lot of ways that you can do that. Probably the most common way and the most simple way is to have like an if statement, which we haven't really gone into. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, and Chris, does that help clear up your question?
Yeah, very much.
Okay.
It's nice to have a little understanding of the construct.
Okay, well, so now I gave you a fishing rod, and the more you practice, the better you'll get. Okay.
I just have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could we possibly get more examples of translating math problems into Java? I'm still terrible at it.
Yes, and that's a tricky thing. So in our video spreadsheet, this chapter 5 one right here, that'll have one that'll go from start to finish. And I'll see if I have some time today that I can make like another one or two of those for you guys. So that's a very common request. So, all right. So without any further ado, let's dive into chapter 5. All right, and we will have some practice in this lecture as well, and in the exam prep. So declaring a variable, I think we're good at that. But how to declare, you just have to use the keyword var. So if I come back into here, you see in this function, I declared 2 variables. And I know that because I have the keyword var and then something. Now, to declare a variable, I actually don't have to assign it anything. I could say var my name. And at this point, it would be undefined. I could use this variable. I could assign it something. If I try to access this variable, I won't get an error. It won't like break my code, but it doesn't have anything. JavaScript doesn't even know what type it is. If I wanted to declare this with like a default type, I could say, an empty string to say, hey, this is going to be a name. Or if I had a variable called my age, but I didn't know what it was, maybe I would want to declare it as 0 for now until I assigned it something. Or I could have like var is student equals true or something like that. So all of these are different ways of declaring variables, and right now I'm assigning them basically like a default value. Okay, but I could just assign a variable or declare a variable without assigning it anything. And then from here on out, anytime I reference it, I would just say is student equals true. Okay, or whatever it is. If it was my name, I could say my name equals Nathan, or my age equals 15, or whatever it is. Okay, but you only use the var keyword once when you actually declare the variable. Okay, this var keyword will literally grab some memory, some space in your system's memory to store a variable. Okay, and so you only do that once, because once you have it stored and once you have that space in memory, you can just reassign it to whatever you want, and it'll use that same allocation. All right. Any questions on this? Any questions on declaring a variable? Okay.
I actually have one.
Yeah.
So underneath where you have it highlighted, the var x, where it says var y and z, the z is still declared because it's just separated by the comma from the var. Is that understood?
Good question. Yeah. So let's say I had multiple variables that I wanted to declare, and I wanted to save a couple of lines of code. All right. I could have var my name, and let's see, our syntax there has a comma, and then is student, and I could instantiate as many variables as I wanted here. Okay, and this is the same thing as saying, okay, it's the exact same thing. It's just shorthand, kind of threw them into the same line of code. All right.
Okay,
Great
cool.
question.
So you could also assign those variables a value in the same line,
Yes, you can.
as long as it's separated by a comma.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll have good use case for that, and other times, you know, it might be a little bit cleaner and easier to read your code and debug it, and reference your code if it's split out into different lines. But you totally can do that. Good question. All right, so variable types, we already looked at a couple. We have a Boolean, it's either true or false, lowercase on both. A number, okay, that could be an integer, a float value, just a number, okay, an integer is a whole number, anything else would have some length of decimal that it has the ability to hold. A string is always inside of quotations, okay, so don't be confused when you see something like this. My age equals 15, okay, this is not a number data type. Even though it's a number, it's a string, and that's because it's in quotation marks. All right, anytime you get a value from a user, like in an input box, it will always be a string, okay? So you might have some math assignments this week, and so if I was going to get a number from a user, but I know that it's going to be a string, I would have to say parse float and wrap this whole thing inside of this parser, okay? So I have this right here, whatever it returns from the user, I'm going to parse, okay? Parse float means you're going to allow decimals. If I knew it was going to be a whole number, like how many times has someone been at the fair, that's going to be a whole number, then I would use parse int, okay?
So can you always use parse float where you use parse int?
Yes, yes you can. And the only reason why there's a distinction is because one takes up more space in memory. So if you're assigning 1 million variables a float value when you only need an int, that might cause performance issues, okay? But yes, functionally speaking, yes. So good question. All right. A function, okay, we've seen functions. They're declared with the function keyword. If you wanted to, you could also declare them with the var keyword. It would look like var template function equals function, okay, and that would do the exact same thing. A little bit more verbose and pointless. So we just write it like this right here, okay. But that is a data type, okay. This template function, its data type is a function, okay. And then you have an object like document, like math, the ones that are built into JavaScript. You could also have arrays, but a document, or sorry, an object can be declared in a number of ways. I could have var student equals, and then I open it up with curly braces, and then it can have a bunch of attributes. I could have a name attribute in here, and I would say Nathan, then a comma, and then an age attribute in here, and then whatever the age is online, you know. And so this is an object, and it is a way to efficiently organize data. You look at the math object in JavaScript, it's like you don't have to look anywhere for the square root. You know, you know it's going to be in the math object, along with log and e and pi. You know, it's all in the math object. So really helpful way to organize things. And you don't have to worry about that right now. We'll get to that in a couple weeks. And then another really big object that we have is an array. Okay, you can name it anything you want, and an array is declared with square brackets, and it can hold any type of data. These could be strings. I could have an array of objects. Let's say I had a student object for each of you that had like 10 attributes with like address, phone number, middle name, last name, whatever. I could have an array of my students for this class. So anyways, or I could just have a simple array of numbers or strings, or mix it up, because JavaScript allows that. But
in the array, do they have an index? Like, is each one of those numbers that's inside the array, is that indexed?
Yep, zero based. So the index of 0 would hold the value of 1, index of 1 will hold the value of 5, and so forth up to our last one, which would be index of 4.
Okay. And I would be able to call that index if I needed to. Like, say I needed a specific 4, I could call that index and get the value of 4.
Yep, just like that.
Oh, cool.
Okay. And we will cover that in chapter 10. All right, so any questions on data types or variable types? Okay. Let's look at assigning variables. Pretty sure we just did all of these. Any questions here? Okay. Again, these are the data types, and that's it. So you don't have to remember any other ones. Undefined is a data type. And notice it's there just because we didn't assign it anything. So its data type would be undefined, as would its value. And then there's the other 5 that we talked about. So, all right, so let's have a look at desk checks. Okay, you saw desk checks yesterday in your first assignment. So let's just run over this briefly. What desk check does is it helps you work through how a computer is processing code. Okay, so in this particular example, we assigned 3 new variables, each of these values. Variable A got the value of x, which was 7, and then we reassigned x, and it got the value of 4. Now, notice A didn't change. It didn't change to 4 because we only reassigned x, and that's just how it works. So this is a very simple example of a desk check. They can get pretty deep. I can't even imagine doing a desk check on some of the programs that I've written in the past. But any questions on this?
So just to clarify, because we're assigning, we're not making something equal to. That's why one number changing doesn't affect the other variable, because it's assigned, not equal to the other variable.
Yeah, they still hold a unique place in memory. And there are times where you want the reference in memory to be the same. In which case, if you change one variable, it would change the other. Okay, but in this case, with the programs that we're using, they will always have their
Unique value.
unique locations in memory. Yep.
That's cool.
Good question. All right. So swapping values between variables. This might seem like a simple thing, but like, oh yeah, you give me A, I'll give you B. Let's swap. In JavaScript, because of the way things are stored in memory, and in every programming language I'm aware of, I guess there are programming languages that can shorten this process up, but in the background, they're doing the exact same thing. Okay, so var A equals 10, var B equals 20. We need a temporary variable that we can delete afterwards. We're not going to use it for anything else, to be able to store the initial value when it's assigned another value. So A gets the value of B, which is 20 right here. And as soon as that's there, we don't have anything to assign to B. That 10 that A used to have is gone. Okay, and that's why we had to assign it to a temporary variable. In this case, we named it swap. Okay, and that is how you could swap the value of 2 different variables. Okay, use cases for this are very minimal, if any. But the purpose of me wanting to teach you this is to understand how things are allocated in memory and how things move around. Okay, as soon as you assign a value to a variable, if there was anything there before, it's gone. Okay. Yeah. Any questions on this? Okay. Arithmetic expressions. Okay. So bringing us back to our elementary, middle school, and high school days. Okay. So we have a number of arithmetic operators that we can use in JavaScript. So we have the negation operator, which won't be used too much, but it is there. Okay, and the only reason why I say it won't be used too much is because pretty much always, and I'm no mathematician, but pretty much always when you use a negation operator, you could use something else, whether it's a minus sign or parentheses or something to basically reverse whatever something is. Okay, but this does exist and you can use it. We have multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. We have our assignment operator. Okay, so this is an arithmetic operator. It's also just a regular assignment operator. You see, there's no arithmetic here, but I'm using an assignment operator, okay, to be able to assign this variable a value, okay? And then there is the modulus, okay? I get lots of questions about the modulus. Basically what it is the remainder that is there after division takes place. Okay, so if I take 4 divided by 2, 2 goes into 4 evenly twice, and there's no remainder. So if I did 4 mod 2, the answer would be 0. Okay, if I did 5 modulus 2, 2 goes into 5 evenly twice with 1 left over. Okay, and we can test that. If I come back over here, again, shout out to my videos over here. You can watch the Chrome Developer Tools console tab one. I do some of this stuff in there. But if I did 4 modulus 2, you can see exactly what JavaScript is going to do. This is a JavaScript compiler right here. You can practice anything. The big square root thing from your guys' desk check yesterday, you could throw that entire thing in here. Be like math dot square root 3 plus 3 plus 8 plus 8, and see what it'll get. Okay, whatever. I don't remember what it was, but anyways, back to modulus. Let's clear this out. So 4 modulus 2 was 0, okay, because 2 goes into it evenly twice with nothing left over. 5 modulus 2 is 1, okay. No decimals with modulus, you just get whatever's left over, okay. If I had 15 modulus 4, okay, what do you get? Oh, I guess it appeared, okay, because 4 goes into a 12 3 times, and then there's 3 left over to get to 15, okay. Any questions on this? Okay, this is a really good way and an extremely efficient way to find out if something is an even number or not. Let's say the user types in like 25. And regardless of what they type in, I want to see if they typed in an even number. Let's say I made a variable called user input, and they typed in 25. Okay, I could say user input modulus 2 to check to see if that was an even number. If that equaled 0, it would mean there would be nothing left over after doing modulus 2, which means it would be an even number because 2 went into it evenly. And if you get 1 out of that, then you know it's not a number. Okay, so a lot of uses for modulus. No questions? You guys are good with that? Okay. Then, and I'm assuming you guys are good with like multiplication. I'm just kidding. Okay, let's keep going. All right, operator precedence. This is a big deal, okay? A lot of you guys missed one of the questions on the, oh man, I can't remember what it was. Was it the desk check? I think it was the desk check. Yeah, because that's, or it was the quiz you guys took yesterday. I think it was the quiz you took. But a lot of you guys missed it because of operator precedence. Okay, it had that like 6 minus n as the numerator and different things. And so to have that happen first, the 6 minus n, so you're not like dividing n by whatever you had in the denominator and so forth, we use parentheses. Okay, parentheses is the highest. It has the highest precedence. It will always get evaluated first. Negations next. These next two are tied: multiplication, division, and modulus. And then addition and subtraction is next. And then after all of that takes place, you have the assignment operator. Okay, and you guys can play around with this. Let me clear this out again. So if I have var x equals, let's say 5 minus 2, and just type in x, you can see it'll be 3. If I did like y, or var y equals, let's say 5 minus 2 times 3. Okay, there might be a little bit of confusion as to which would happen first, but we know that multiplication will come before subtraction. So this would end up being -1 if we look at y. Okay, because this will come up with 6, and then 5 minus 6 is -1. Okay, and you guys can test this out. When you guys are taking tests, quizzes, exams, anything like that, we're doing homework, I encourage you to run it here, okay? The desk checks are super nice, okay? You guys can like think through things and be like, yeah, I think that's what would happen here. But when you get into a lot of math, I know my brain is like, okay, give me a break, man. Like, let's write some of this out. And we might as well do it in the console where it actually will like work for us as well, okay? All right, so please practice stuff here. W3 Schools, if you look at W3 Schools, you can practice with all these different operators as well. And
so what happens when you run the code and then it works, but it's not right?
So if that was me, I would go over to the sources tab and debug it. Okay, so let's say in here,
So is that my problem? Is I didn't debug it?
maybe, I mean, I don't know. So let's try something. Let's say I
Because I
had,
tried it out in like the examples of the W3 schools, and
yeah,
it said it worked, and it came out with the right answer, and then it wasn't.
interesting. So let's say I had this big old equation right here. Let's say plus, I don't know, I'm just playing around here, okay? So let's say I have this, okay? This horrible equation. And I'm gonna run this and leave a breakpoint right here, just inside my function, okay? I could leave it on this line if I wanted to, doesn't matter. But then I'm gonna run my function. Doesn't matter what the function is either. This is my template program. I don't care about the input in this case. I just wanna see what's gonna happen with this math, okay? I would wanna think through this by order of preference or by order of precedence, okay? So I know that parentheses are gonna happen first. So I could highlight over this and be like, okay, that's gonna be -4. All right, what's next? It'd be this 5 times 2. So that's gonna be 10. And then minus and plus have the same order of precedence, okay? But the point of the point of debugging this is I can highlight any chunk of this equation and see exactly what it'll spit out, okay? And once I have that, this 10, I can be like, okay, well, what's this whole thing? All right, that'll be -5. And then what's this whole thing? Okay, -9. And then if I multiply that by pi, what will that be? Then I can see, you know, like that is what would end up being assigned to x. Okay, so anytime I have really big math problems, I'll oftentimes check chunks of it in the console or in a regular calculator, and then I'll run it, debugging it like this in sources, and then I can break it up by chunk and make sure that each piece is getting exactly what I want. As far as your guys' assignments go for this week, I forgot what the second one is, but like the courts to leaders one, in addition to checking it like this and making sure that you're good to go there, I would also check it with Google. You know, type in a couple of values in your program and do the same thing with Google and make sure that that conversion in Google is the exact same as what you're converting in your program. Yeah, so any questions about this? Or order of precedence or anything else? Okay. Algebra to JavaScript, we're going to see a lot of this in this course. So just know that the more you do it, the easier it'll get, okay? The way I like to think about things, and I've talked with a number of you guys about this already, but I really like to break things up logically. I like to try to get it to look pretty similar to the algebraic expression. But you can see this conversion right here, it follows this really nicely. You know, it has I times, and then in parentheses, and this guy's right here, and I didn't have to have parentheses for this because of the operator precedence, and then times, and then y divided by n. Now I might get the question like, oh, why'd you put parentheses around this? Well, honestly, it's because I want to be 100% sure that it's happening when I want it to happen, okay? Anytime I have a denominator, I will always stick it in parentheses, okay? Then regardless of whether I have addition or multiplication on the outside of that, I know I'm good to go, okay? Frequently, you'll have to do like a square root inside of a fraction or things like that. And I would also make sure to put those inside of parentheses as well. Okay, so you look at this one, all right, I would have 7 divided by, and look at all these beautiful parentheses, okay? I made sure to put this 2 inside of this parenthesis right here because otherwise I would have done 7 divided by 2 first, and that 3.5 would have been multiplied by this, and it would have gotten a completely different value, okay? And then all that would have been this first fraction right here, and then minus 3 times, and then I have all of this in parentheses as well. Okay. And again, with something like this, I would split it out. You know, as you're typing it, I would type it by chunk, you know. So with this, you might start with like 7 divided by, or you might start with this denominator, or you might start with a plus b times c, you know, but break it out, make sure you get in those individual values first before you throw it all together. And then check your answers like 5 times. Any questions on these? Okay. I included this link here. You guys, if you didn't know, you have access to these PowerPoints. If you click on other resources here, here's the PowerPoint that I'm using right now, this chapter 5 one. But I included this link down here because it's just a really good way to practice. You can practice in your console. You can also practice here. You can practice in the sources tab of the developer tools. But here's also a really good way to practice. It's also very simple. So, all right. So let's look at an example. Celsius to Fahrenheit. Okay. A relatively simple expression here. We have 9 divided by 5 times C plus 32. Okay. So what we would do in this program, we first get the Celsius value from the user, okay, because this function is going to convert a Celsius value to Fahrenheit. And then we will parse that to make sure that it's a number. If we don't parse it, then you can't really do math with it, okay? And let me show you an example of that real quick. So this right here, user input, well, I'm gonna delete these things. So the user will type in something, and then I will say, alert, get us a nice little pop-up, 2 plus user input. Okay. And in here, if I refresh this, all right, we have our alert. I'm gonna take off this breakpoint, and in this input, I'm just gonna put 5. Okay, so we should get 7 if we do this math. Okay, oh, I didn't fix that error that we put in intentionally. Let's fix that. All right, let's run this. I'm gonna put in 5. And look at that. 2 plus 5 is 25. It's because 5 wasn't a number. 5 was a string, and so it concatenated our number 2, and the string converted it all into a string, and that's what it alerted. Okay, so that is why the parsing is a big deal, because 25 is not what I wanted. Okay, so 2 ways you can parse it. As you see here, they made an entirely different line right here to parse the input value from the user. Okay, that's totally fine. And that might actually be helpful for debugging purposes. But like I showed you a minute ago, you can also just put it right here and parse whatever will come out from the user. Now, since you guys are talking about error checking and stuff, let me just throw this out there. This is dangerous. In an actual program where, you know, if you had customers are going to do all sorts of stuff that they shouldn't. Not because they're trying to be malicious. I mean, they might be, but also because a lot of people are just ignorant, okay? They'll be like, oh, you know, that's not a number box, that's like where I type my name. And if that happened and they actually typed a name in here, you'd get an error and it'd break your program because you can't parse a name, you know? So just be aware of that if you decide to do something like this to shorten up your code. It's fine for the purposes of this class, but anytime you actually have to do error checking, you will want to parse it after you've made sure that it is a parsable string, okay? And that is when you would use something like the is not a number, okay? And you'd have to have some logic in there to say if user input, okay? And we haven't gone into that, but just so you guys know. And then we do the math. Notice there aren't any parentheses. There aren't any parentheses here. We could put parentheses and it'd be just fine. In this case, I knew that you know, these 3 would take place at the exact same time, and so it doesn't matter which one happens first. And then plus 32. So,
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the document, I get the last line of code.
Yeah.
Is it proper whatever to do all the math in the var f, or can we do the math on the inner HTML thing?
So that brings me back to the same point that I just said a second ago, because technically, let's open up this piece of code. We're in chapter 5. That's your assignment. Let's see, Celsius to Fahrenheit. So technically, if I wanted to, I could put every single one of these lines of code in the same line of code. Okay, I could start off with my parse float, have that. Then I could do my math. Whoops, I'll just copy that on top of that. And then in that parse float value, I could just put this. Okay, and that would work. And I could delete the rest of these lines and I would have one line of code in this function. Okay, so yes, you can. and JavaScript will work like that, and that's just fine. But it does make it more confusing. And maybe confusing is not the right word, but it will take longer to understand what this program is doing now that it's kind of like shaped like this. Okay, so anytime it makes sense to throw something together, feel free to throw it together. But debugging this would be awful. Okay, it'd be hard to stick a break. I mean, you could put a breakpoint there, but you know, so there's pros and cons. Okay, I mean, the majority of websites that are deployed to the web are they have what's called minified JavaScript, and that means that they ran it through a program to basically put all of their JavaScript code into a single line of code. Okay, so the computer can handle it, all right? But anytime you're developing code, you don't do that, okay? You leave it spaced out so it's easy to read, it's easy to tell what's going on, it's easy to fix errors, easy to make changes, and so forth. But this is extreme. As to your question, you didn't ask that, but I'm just answering. Yes, you could. You can. JavaScript will pretty much allow anything. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, then let's keep going. All right. Assignment operators. So here's some shortcuts for you guys. Here are the operators. Okay, you notice that it's kind of like merging our assignment operator with a little bit of math. Okay, and this will be the last thing that gets executed. Okay, if I have a whole equation on the right side of this operator here, that would all get executed first, and then this would happen. But what this does, here's an example of x times equals 5, and that basically means x equals x times 5. Okay, so if I had a number, let's say I had, let's say I was making like a times table app, okay, and I was at the point where I wanted to multiply my value by 5. Okay, let's say I had var x equals 5. If I wanted to get 25, I could easily change x to x times equals 5. And what that would do, x already has the value of 5. And then we would multiply x by 5, and then x would get 25. Or I could declare a new variable and say, well, here we wouldn't be able to declare a new variable because this shortcut operator always will operate on something that's already existing. Okay, and that's why it's a shortcut. Okay, so right here, here's their equivalent example, and these will do the exact same thing. Okay, x times equals 5 is the exact same thing as saying x equals x times 5. One's just shorter, and so once you're comfortable with some of this arithmetic going on, then you can start using some of these shortcuts. Okay. Any questions on any of these? Okay. Again, I would encourage you to practice these. Okay, whether it's in your console or W3 Schools or in a program that you're actually running, I would encourage you to practice these. Here's another shortcut. These are the increment and decrement operators. These, on the other hand, unlike the other shortcuts, have a use outside of just being shorthand. Okay, x plus plus or plus plus x will end up being x plus equals 1. Okay, which is the shortcut we just learned, or x equals x plus 1. All of these will get the exact same thing. It will get whatever x is plus 1. That will be the ending result of x. The only difference with this increment and decrement operator is order of precedence. Okay, so the pre-increment operator and the pre-decrement operator will happen before anything else does. Okay, whereas the post-increment and post-decrement will happen after everything else. Okay, now here's a couple of examples using these and seeing how, like if we look at example 18, we declare a as 4, or we declare a and assign it 4, and then b equals plus plus a times 3 plus 2. Okay, so we know that this is a pre-increment operator, so a would get bumped to 5 immediately before any of this other math takes place. So it'd be 5 times 3, which would be 15, plus 2, 17, and that's why b got 17. Now, if we look at the post-increment operator, it looks almost exactly the same, except it's a plus plus instead of plus plus a. So when a is multiplied by 3, a would still be 4. It hasn't been incremented yet. So it'd be 12 plus 2, which would be 14. So B got the value of 14, and then A still ended up at 5. So the ending result of A is always the same, whether you use A plus plus, plus plus A, or A plus equals 1, or A equals A plus 1. They're all the same in that regard. But when you're doing other arithmetic with them that other variables are dependent on, then it's important to know if it's a pre-increment or post-increment operator. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, let me just say that outside of this class, it'll be very uncommon to see math written like this. And that's because it's easy to make mistakes if you're writing it like this, okay? It would be more common to see, you know, A times 3 plus 3, okay? Or if you have to increment A, it'd just be, you know, A plus 1 in parentheses times 3 plus 2 or something like that. However, you do see these operators quite a bit. Anytime you have a loop, the way loops work in JavaScript, you basically loop from 0 to some value. Generally, you can loop in all sorts of ways, but you'll just increment or decrement, however your loop set up, but by a single value, so that, you know, and so you will frequently see, you know, as you're incrementing inside of a loop, you'll just increment using x plus plus or something like that to increment it by 1, and then you keep on looping. So these are common to see. Okay. All right, math object. We looked at that a little bit today. Let's go ahead and run it in a debugger, and I can show you guys this. So if I had, I'm just going to say math.py. All right, and we're going to run this. I'm going to copy this file path and run it over here. Hit F12 to open up our developer tools. Go to the sources tab, click on this, and put a breakpoint right there. Looks like we have an error here, though. Do we put an error in? Line 23. Let's see what we did. Yes, we did. So let's just delete those lines. All right. Refresh this so there's no error. And I don't care about the input. I only care about this math object. So I'm going to hit convert. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this is because if I hover over math, I can see everything that's in it that's accessible to us. Okay. I don't go around with this table from our book saved on my computer. So, you know, you could Google it. It'd come up in W3 Schools with these lists, or you could just run it and hover over it and see everything that's in it. Okay. Notice there's two different types of data here. There are these constants, which will never change, and then there are these different functions that you can use that will do different things. So I don't expect you to memorize this. I certainly don't have it memorized, but I do expect you to know how to use it. Okay. And if you need to figure out, you know, wow, how am I going to do square root? You know, I want you to know how you can actually use it. Thomas asked, are we going to use a lot of those fancy math functions? No. You're going to use some of them, okay? You're definitely going to use pi and square root. You might end up using, in this class, floor, max or min, maybe. Pow you will use, some people already have. Random, round. Yeah. So some of the more simple ones. Okay. Good question. Can you explain, can you have an example of math.round? So math.round, let's look at it. Let's bust open our console here. Come back over here and let's start playing. So let's say I have var x equals 15 point some decimal, okay? There's x, you can see that it was assigned the value that I gave it. If I say x.round, that was my bad, math.round, passing in the value of x, you can see it just rounded 15 to 15, okay? So that's an example of math.round.
Could you add precision to that so I could get like 2 or 3 decimal points or values after the decimal point?
Yes, you can get as many as you want. I don't think you could do it with math.round. Let's Google this together. Let's say JavaScript round to 2 decimal places. There's several different ways that you can do it.
Yeah, you can't get the decimal places specifically for math.round, but you can do var with like digits and do multiplication, pow 10 to the digits power rounds, and then multiply the answer by the multiplier and then divide by the multiplier. It gives you the spaces.
Yep. And an easier way to do that, there's this toFixed function. This is built into JavaScript, but notice this isn't in the math object. You don't see the math object anywhere. It is something that's built into JavaScript that works with any number data type. Okay. So if I'm in here and I have, let's just declare y as another number with a decimal. Okay. And I say y dot toFixed. Okay. And I could pass in a parameter here. I could say, yeah, I want 5 decimal places. And notice that it spits out a string. Okay, if you Google JavaScript toFixed, first thing that'll come up, W3 schools. Oh, I guess it's second. But W3 schools pops up, and you can see that toFixed converts a number into a string, keeping a specified number of decimals. Okay, so it'll always return a string. But if you need to do more math with that string, you can convert it or you can parse it. But yeah, and this is just for any number. You don't have to use a math object for that, but it'll work with any number data type in JavaScript.
And you can run that toFixed after you've already rounded the number?
No, because when you've rounded it, you lost your data. Okay, so if I look at x right now, we have x there. So I guess this won't actually change the value of x, but it would assign this to something else. So if I said var z equals x, or sorry, math.round and pass in x, then x still has our decimals. Z is 15. Okay, and then if I try to do z dot toFixed, I mean, it wouldn't do anything because there aren't any decimals.
So I guess my question is, how can I round to a specific number of decimal points? Is that possible?
Yes, using toFixed. Okay, let me.
Okay.
Yeah, so if I had the number var x, and then I had, a bunch of decimals, and let's say this was change for, I'm like making like a shopping cart app or something like that, and I wanted 2 decimals for money. I could say var dollar value equals x dot toFixed, and then I would pass and say 2 decimal places. And if I say dollar value, you can see that's what came up. Okay.
Okay, because that makes sense. Because I submitted I think it was the quartz conversion, and I was looking at the message I got back from the auto grader, and it was telling me that I needed to round it and stuff like that. But I wasn't able to figure out how I could round it and also have that same precision of 2 decimal points.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. And anytime you need to figure out something like that, you could just say in Google, like JavaScript round, or like I just Google JavaScript round to 2 places or something like that. But also look at this. So W3 schools, if you click on JavaScript, you'll end up with this sidebar over here. JavaScript number, these are all the different things that you can do with a number in JavaScript. Okay, same thing. If I have a string in JavaScript, there's all sorts of like built-in stuff. I could see, oh, char@, where's my first x in my string, or something like that. There's all this stuff that's built into it that you can use. So if you guys want to play around, or explore some of these, you're more than welcome to. So, all right, great questions, you guys. Any other questions on this? All right, well, let's check out some common mistakes. Forgetting to declare a variable. This is a big deal. If I just say miles equals 61 without declaring a variable, I'll get something miles of undefined. It'll be like, yeah, miles isn't defined, or miles is undefined. So make sure you always declare it. Another error is declaring the same variable twice, using var multiple times. We already talked about that. You only declare it once. Forgetting quotes around text. This is huge, you guys. This is a big error that we get. So let's look at this. If I have var x equals, let's just say it's my name. Okay, you know what? We'll make that a little bit more descriptive. var my name equals Nathan. Look at this beautiful error. Nathan isn't defined. If I don't put that in quotes, then it will look in my JavaScript program, or in this case, my console history, which is non-existent, for a variable named Nathan, which doesn't exist. Okay, or I could say var my name equals Nathan. Okay, single quotes, double quotes, doesn't matter. Both ways will be a string, but you can see now it actually knows that I was assigning it a string value. Okay, so this is a big error. All right, lots of people will get errors on this and be like, "Why isn't this working? It's like perfect." You're like, yeah, you don't have a variable that's named that. You need to put it in quotations. So let's see, using parentheses for multiplication. Okay, this works perfectly in algebra, but it doesn't work in JavaScript. You have to put the multiplication operator there. Okay. Using a caret for exponentation, again, works perfectly in Java or in algebra, but it doesn't work in JavaScript. Okay. The most versatile way to use exponentation in JavaScript is to use math.pow. There are multiple ways to do, like, to square something. Let's look at a couple real quick. So if I had var x equals 2, I could say x and have that. Let's see. There's a shorthand one where you have like a couple of asterisks, where you have several. Anyways, but that's one way to do it. You could also just say x times x. That would do the same thing. But the most versatile is to say math.pow, and math.pow will take two parameters. The first one being the number that you're going to raise to a certain exponent, and the second one is whatever you want to raise it to. Okay. So yeah, I would recommend you guys to use math.pow just because it is the most versatile and it'll work in any situation. But regardless of intent, the caret will never work in JavaScript. Any questions so far on any of these?
I know I'm backtracking, but I was just thinking about the rounding question he was asking earlier.
No.
Couldn't you essentially just ask, like program it to say times this by 100 or times it by 1,000, and then you get 3 decimal points?
Yes.
And so forth. And then you don't even have to worry about whether syntax you have to use.
Yep, you totally could. And I think someone else mentioned that a second ago too. But you could do that. You could do that.
Sorry if someone else said it too.
No, it's okay. But I'm glad you're pointing it out because there's a lot of different ways to do these exact same things. Just like I showed you guys the exponents just now. There's like 3 different ways to square something. But it's the same way when you want to round something. I'm pretty sure even in here, there's this, which got a lot of votes, but if I scroll down, I'm pretty sure there's something else.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, here they're using math.round, and you see they have that math going where they like multiply it by 100, and wow, they're using 2 fixed as well. Anyways, there's a lot of different ways to do things.
Overkill in that code.
And it still got 42 votes. So I don't know. This is probably extremely descriptive and helpful if you want that, but I'm all for like the, wow, yeah, 2 fixed. That's perfect. Oh, here's a good one. Math.round. Okay. So, and that'll do it to 2 decimal places. But all right. So yeah, great comment. And forgetting to convert parse text to a number. We looked at that example where I had the alert of 2 plus 5 that we typed in 5. And instead of getting 7, it got 25. Okay. And that's because one of those numbers was actually a string data type. And so it concatenated them into a single string. Okay. So be very aware of that. If you're getting some like random number and you're like, what on earth? Make sure you're parsing your numbers. So before you do any math with them. All right. Any questions on chapter 5? Okay, well, in that case, we are going to stop this recording and start a new one.